Hello, everybody. As Ivan said, my name is Yaroslav. I'm Senior Solutions Architect in AWS, primarily working with independent software vendors. And I'm going to talk about reInvent recap for database analytics and networking. But before, I just have to ask, can you raise your hand if you know what reInvent is? OK. So for those who don't know, if you know this type of events when somebody relatively bold, in sweater and jeans and maybe in glasses announce a new product from the stage, right? So we have our Amazon, this type of events where we're announcing like new stuff. It's happening every year in Las Vegas in the beginning of December. And traditionally, then in the communities and with our customers, we have this type of events called recap when we are focusing on like major announcements from that reInvent. We cannot cover all of them definitely because it would take like 4 hours, right? It's a lot of them because reInvent itself, it's like for the whole week. And that's what's happening today, right? So if you had a question what reInvent is, what it is about, so it's about that. It's about like highlighting the announcements which happened during the reInvent. And my highlighting was be about these 2 topics, right? Not so sexy as generative AI, of course, but still we have something interesting to discuss. And so I'll start with the networking. I think the main thing which we announced on the reInvent regarding the networking related to the VPC endpoints. And then can you raise your hand if you know what VPC endpoint is in AWS? OK. So for those who doesn't know, that's a quick tour, right? Basically, in AWS, we have a concept of these virtual networks. And of course, you need to connect them between each other somehow. And we have different ways to do that. At L4 layer, there are at least 3 of them. 2 of them are bidirectional, and you need to, to deal with some stuff like routing and so on. And there is one way called VPC endpoint, which is basically when, first of all, it's unidirectional, right? Only in this example, only consumer have access, basically consumes or has networking access to the customer services. And then it focuses on the particular service, right? So how it's used. So that's the first use case when there are some customer services behind the networking load balancer. And remember that, because having this networking load balancer is important for the announcement itself. Right. The second scenario is when you want to, we have the service which are not in the virtual network per se. For example, S3, right? If you want to reach S3, then you go through the public internet. However, maybe you have the requirements that you want to do it like privately through our network. So for that, the only way to do that through the VPC endpoint. And the third scenario is actually very default for the SaaS, right? If, for example, you're buying some SaaS from our AWS Marketplace, third-party one, and the default way for them providing you access, again, through our private network, not through the internet, would be the VPC endpoint. They basically give you that VPC endpoint. So now, what is announcement was about? Like, there were actually 2 of them. First one, relatively important one, is this cross-region support for VPC endpoints. Believe it or not, before this reInvent, you could not use a VPC endpoint to connect to the services in the different region. Now you can, right? So you can achieve this type of architecture. The second one, from my point of view, more important one, right? So imagine this scenario when you have some application, and that application needs to have access to your customer database. For example, you have an application which you're selling is about, like, I don't know, data quality, data analytics, whatsoever, right? You need to have that access to the customer database. Or maybe it's your organizational account, but you don't have control over it, like it's like different department whatsoever. So before reInvent, if you wanted to achieve that access from this application to the database, it would look like that. So you would create VPC endpoint, and then you have to put this network load balancer in front of the database. There is no another way around it, right? Because VPC endpoint cannot directly be connected to the database. But then it's not the end, because basically network load balancer operating on L4 layer, right? It doesn't know about like that you have, for example, a cluster, not one instance of database, but the cluster. Also, what can happen is that your database instance fail, right? And will be replaced, and will have different IP, for example, right? So then load balancer basically will point to nothing. in this case. So usually, and that's what we recommended before, even in our blog post, you would have like Amazon SNS to be notified about that something changed in your database setup, and then AWS Lambda who will re-register the new instance, for example, in that network load balancer. So you see it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to set up for consumer just to provide access to the database. It was not really convenient, right? So what happens? Well, what we announced on reInvent, right? Again, the same scenario. We have application who needs to have access to the database. Now, what resource owners have to do, he has to create so-called resource gateway. So basically, it's a construct, or it's an ingress point for all VPC endpoints into that VPC. So you need only one. You can create several of them, but you need only one resource gateway per virtual network, right? And then the resource owner creates so-called resource configuration. So basically, what exactly he is going to share with you, right? It might be the whole cluster configuration. So basically, it's called an ARN resource configuration. So he will say, I have the whole cluster, no matter how many nodes inside, no matter how read replicas inside, that's the cluster ARN, deal with it. And then this resource configuration is sharing with the consumer through the RAM, through the resource manager. And consumer takes this resource configuration and basically create a VPC point with type resource. That's a new type of VPC endpoints. And using that, it has access to the resource you provided, right? So now, in database case, it's like it doesn't matter what's happening inside your database. Your consumer, as a consumer, always has access to that database. And it's not only about database. Instead of database, in theory, it can be like Kafka cluster. It might be AKS, Kubernetes, right? Something like that. So it's like more or less universal way now to share different resources from the resource owner to the consumer through the VPC endpoint. So that was about the networking. Now, the next will be analytics, right? And the first thing which we announced, technically it's like in the storage, but I would say it's more about analytics. We announced a new type of S3 buckets called S3 tables. For those who don't know, S3 is a object storage, right? One of our oldest services, one of most popular one. And basically what we realized that a lot of our customers are using S3 for storing and, let's say, operating Iceberg tables. Can you raise your hand who knows what Apache Iceberg is? OK. So basically, you was able to do that anyway before, right? So S3 has, like, you can put Iceberg manifest and work with it. However, we created like a new type of tables. So now this Iceberg table is basically first-class AWS resource. It has its own ARN, meaning that you can apply the S3 resource policy to it as it used to be with objects, right? And it also has a dedicated endpoint to deal with it. Also, what a benefit to using these types of buckets is that, on one hand, you still can use all the applications who is working with the Iceberg API as it was before. However, since now we definitely know how you're using this S3 bucket, we definitely know it's about Iceberg, right? So it's optimized for that. So basically, performance of such bucket from the Iceberg perspective will be much better. Now, the next announcement in this analytics space is Amazon SageMaker. That's what Carl skipped. And that's a very confusing, actually, right? Because can you raise your hand who knows what Amazon SageMaker is? OK. So if you used it before the reInvent, from the reInvent, what you used before, now called Amazon SageMaker AI. Like all the old functionality, it's now renamed to Amazon SageMaker AI. And Amazon SageMaker without AI, that's completely new thing, which is not much about AI anymore. That's why we added this AI to that name. So basically, it consists of 3 layers, you might say. So on the bottom, we have a lakehouse. So that's about like data storage. It might be S3, it might be Redshift. It might be some zero-ETL integrations with some SaaS providers whatsoever. Then the middle layers is data AR governance, everything that comes with data catalog, data quality, data lineage, right? All that stuff on that layer. And then we have Unified Studio, which is in preview. That's basically, if you're familiar with things like AMR Studio we had, right? Glue Studio, like we have a lot of studios, right? So now we are trying to kind of unify it into the one experience. It has different capabilities, as you can see. It's about data processing, SQL analytics. Some of the functionality is already there. Some of them we are expecting to come soon. Right, and for those who doesn't know what preview means, right, it means that this service basically in beta in a way, right? So sometimes we are not even charging you for using that. And we definitely do not recommend to use it in production yet, because what can happen is that like it's actually in active preview means we actively collecting the feedback from the customers and something may change. So we cannot guarantee that it will be as it is today when it comes to GA. So, like, do not rely on it on production. Yeah, so that's about Amazon SageMaker. And maybe one thing out of that, because it's really important, we missed that for a long time, right? So now we have data lineage tracking across all AWS tools, right? So that was like, I was working with the customers who is doing analytics and big data a lot. And basically all of them said that, you know, guys, like one thing you're missing is data lineage, right? It exists somehow, but still not much, right? So we're trying to fix that. So now it exists almost across all the tools, especially in Amazon SageMaker, right, on that middle layer. Okay, and now we are going to the databases, right, to the third topic. So the first announcement was about scale to zero for Amazon Aurora Serverless. Can you raise your hand who knows what is Amazon Aurora, and especially serverless? Cool. So if you use it, you know that before, even so we name it serverless, like one of the principles, because I'm into serverless, usually I'm like, evangelize that, right? One of the serverless principles is that if you are not using it, you are not paying for it, right? Like zero request, zero money. But in case of Aurora Serverless specifically, it was not the case, because even if you're not using it at all, you should still pay some minimal amount of money, because it was some minimal amount of this ACUs existed, right? Now it's not the case. Now you can reduce it to zero. It's like now truly serverless service. And basically it sleeps until the first request. After that, it's elevated to some minimal amount of ACUs and then scaled as it used before. So that's why I think it's very, very important announcement, like a little bit shift. The next announcement is about strong consistency for multi-region DynamoDB global tables. Can you raise your hand if you use DynamoDB, or at least know what it is? Okay. So for those who doesn't know, DynamoDB is our key value database. It's serverless, which means you are not managing any kind of infrastructure. And there we had so-called global tables. Basically, it's multi-regional key value database, right? But before this announcement, the only consistency we had there was eventual one, right? So basically, we could not guarantee that if you write and immediately read it, you will get what you just written, just because of the nature of distributed systems, right? Now it is strong consistency for that type of things. So basically, you can have one big global key value table across the regions, and you can have the strong reading consistency for it. It's also in preview, and it currently exists only in 3 US regions, but you know, at some point we will be in GA with that. I think one of the biggest announcements in that space is Amazon Aurora DSQL. Can you raise your hand if you heard about it or even watched the presentation? Okay, we have somebody. So basically, what Aurora DSQL is. So first of all, it's a relational SQL database, which is optimized for transactional workloads, which means we created it for applications, you know, like for games, for, I don't know, for mobile applications, not for analytics, not for data warehousing. For that, we have better tools, right? Then it's scalable up and down. With up, it's all understandable. We are like usually good at it. But also, sometimes we forget that, dealing with 1 million transactions per second, it's not like the very usual case. Of course, we are designing everything in that in mind, but very often, people do not use it. So it scales up and down, and it's serverless as well. So no infrastructure management in that sense. However, what's very important, it's active, and multi-region, which is quite rare for the relational databases, right? It's also PostgreSQL compatible. It's not PostgreSQL per se, but it is compatible. And it's built on our experience, which means, if I remember correctly, we launched Amazon Aurora exactly 10 years ago, right? It was our rethinking of kind of relational database in the cloud. With RDS, it's even more. DynamoDB also related to all services. So with all this experience with our customers, we launched DSQL, right? We designed it from scratch. And if you will have a chance, I definitely recommend you to look into the keynote from Dr. Werner Vogels. It's our CTO. He always have very interesting talk. He maybe do not, announce anything new, but he usually do some forecast about, development future and stuff. And so regarding that one, he basically did step-by-step architecture review, like how we design it, why we design it that way, how we not breaking but gaping cap theorem, if you know what it is. Right, so that's very interesting talk. And also we have a couple of talks which are dive deep into the architecture, like at reInvent from different people, from product managers and so on and so forth. So there are two, I would say, different main scenarios how you can use it. The first one is very simple one, right? You have some application in one region, you don't have to be multi-regional, and you have Amazon DSQL cluster. And then basically it will be active data replication across 3 availability zones, which means it can tolerate catastrophic failure in one of this availability zone. Your customers will never notice, right? Because it's fully automated. Again, it's serverless. You don't need to maintain it. And instead of EC2, where customer application is, it might be Lambda, it might be containers, whatever, right? And for multi-region, that's basically, it works with 40 regions, right? And both regions are active, and they're equal in that sense. And what's happening is that actually, for example, all reads are happening in the region. They never come in to another region, right? They're super fast in that sense. The most expensive thing in this database is doing the commit on the transaction, because then we need, as fast as possible, basically spread it across the regions, right? To be able to read locally. And so that requires, especially if you want to design at scale or you have certain requirements about the latency, maybe you need to do something a little bit different in terms of practice. For example, it will be better to have bigger transactions, because then commit will happen less frequently. Maybe you need to spread indexes a little bit differently, across the regions, right, to avoid conflicts, and so on and so forth. So there are, again, in the sessions, I don't want to dive really deep into it. In the sessions, people who much smarter than me covers that, right? But just for you to know, active, serverless, transactional, all that thing, right? So that's very cool. Yeah, so that's, I think, about it. Any questions?
About those S3 tables. Today I was listening to something else about the event, and they were telling about something called automatic metadata discovery. Now I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, so I want to ask, does it mean that I can take several binary files, just put it to the S3, and these binary files have some structure inside? And the AWS will be able to identify the structure when I put this metadata discovery and then somehow visualize it? Do I understand it correctly?
Not visualize it, but apply to the objects which are in S3 buckets. What we are talking about is a different story. So we have this S3 data tables, right? And the second announcement, but technically it's the storage space, right? It calls S3 metadata. That's what you are talking about. It's not related to no. It's like two different announcements about S3. So that one was more bound to analytics. What you are talking about, it's more about the storage. But you're right. So.
Okay, but maybe not visualize.
Yeah, it will try to recognize what kind of metadata might be extracted out of it and like apply to your objects, because objects might have a metadata industry, right? Any other questions?
Starting faster? No.
Do you hear it correctly?
You're asking if Aurora serverless became faster?
Yes.
Because of that announcement?
Starting, like from the zero, yeah, because of the announcement.
I don't have data to back up that. So,
Version 1 of serverless Aurora was unusable.
yeah, so it's version 2 for a long time, first of all, so it's not related to that particular announcement. Yeah, so I'm not sure if it became faster just because of that announcement, right? So that announcement.
Okay, because when I can scale to completely zero, then I would expect it to also be faster up.
Okay, so I don't have any benchmarks if that's what you're asking, right? So I can try to find, or you can try to find, and usually, if it would be our benchmarks, you may say, okay, of course you will do the best for your own service. So it's always better to find something third party, right?
And what about the distributed scale? It's only 2 regions? Or
Yeah, currently it is. It's like that, and also it's in preview. That's what I forgot to mention, right? So so basically, I explained what preview is, and that's the case where currently it's actually free for experimenting. I am not sure if it even has the price model yet.
that was my next question.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, then you already, like, I had actually a link to the feedback form, if you can show it again, so please give us your feedback so we can improve. If they show QR code. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.